Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another LPA live stream on, this time, free market anarchism. We are LP Alliance, an intercaucus coalition, rebuilding and revolutionizing the Libertarian Party. My name is Amanda Griffiths. I'm joined by Kyle Davis and Derek Wills, Hody Johns, Rose Leatherman, all three. Very, very glad to have you here. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, I am too. I'm very excited. Now, the reason we called the stream...
I'm fixing Hody here.
What? Oh.
There we go.
The reason that we called this stream free market anarchism is because, as far as I understand, Derek and Hody, the two of you refer to yourselves as anarcho-capitalists. Rose, you call yourself a market anarchist. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I'm calling it right now. I'm guessing pretty much all of our differences are going to be semantic.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting because, like, I do know that there are differences, especially like left-wing market anarchism, and I wanted to go around and get what your brand of anarchism is, how you differentiate that from, if you think that there is a difference, from anarcho-capitalism, and then for Derek and Hody, same question to you, but from free market or rather market anarchism. And Rose, you can start if you want. Or no, sorry,
okay,
no.
Rose, yeah. Rose, go ahead. You got it.
I'm sorry, what would you like me to start with?
How you define your anarchism and whether you do see there as being a difference between market anarchism and anarcho-cap, what that difference is, if any.
Right. So I generally refer to myself, if I'm not just referring to myself as a black flag anarchist, as a market anarchist. I'm of the belief that a stateless society consisting of decentralized free markets will be the key to a more equitable and free society. I would define, if I had to define it, I would define it as let the free market eat the rich. I think that what we consider capitalism, or what most people think of when they think of capitalism, is a creation primarily of the state. And
Yeah.
I can get into the whole list of reasons why I don't prefer to use the term capitalism to describe free markets, but
Yeah, sure.
I'd like to go around and have everyone give a brief introduction.
That works. Hody, what about you? What is your anarchism, and is it any different from market anarchism?
Sure. So, yeah, like Rose said, semantics is going to go a long way here. I don't call myself a capitalist in front of people that I know capitalism is going to offend, because what they think is usually Keynesianism or some type of other, big government system. I'm not aiming to offend. I'm aiming to put people on the right path. And usually I can describe anarcho-capitalism in a way that most, even anarcho-communists or anarcho-socialists, would be like, oh, that's great. Yeah, it sounds good. I mean, and just to be, because I think it's good to be accurate if I can, that the most important things here are the ability to acquire property. And this is just like your kind of college definition of it, right? The ability for an individual to own property that is theirs. When they sleep in a bed, the bed is theirs. When they sleep in a house, the house is theirs, right? That if they should want it to be, and do the, and earn the right to be able to trade for that, whatever that trade may be. Free markets, competition, no government intervention. All those things are things that I like. I have a great relationship with anarcho-socialists and communists because they can do whatever they want within that system. What I've described is more something that I don't want interfered with, as opposed to things that must be done. Mm-hmm. And so anarcho-capitalism to me is very broad. It's very exciting, right? Like when I read about it, one of the reasons why it's such a simple philosophy, but our books are like Bible thick, is because there's so much exploration to do within that framework of like how we best operate. I'm a Christian as well. And one of the things that I like that the Bible does is it's like, well, let's not murder innocent people. Let's kind of not commit genocides. Let's set our slaves free. Let's not do these terrible things. What good can we do? There's so much good we can do. And so, like, to me, anarcho-capitalism is just that ability to acquire property for ourselves that we'd like, and then let other people do the same and use it the way they'd like. And if they want to use it like communists or syndicalists or whatever it may be, or free marketeers, that's okay with me. In fact, I would love that competition. We talk about competition, and I don't just competition within capitalism. I think capitalism should have to compete with a socialist society. If they're right, let them prove it. Let them be better. And hey, I'll gladly join that if they produce better results. My guess is it's going to be something more like McDonald's or Burger King. People have different preferences. Nobody's right or wrong. One might be more popular, but that doesn't
Well, I
mean
mean, like, but Burger King is objectively worse, right?
Right. I mean, let's be honest here. If we're talking fries, there's no competition. But yeah, like that's just the way I see it. It's very broad. And I like to keep it that way. But ANCAP Air should probably has the correct answer to this question.
Well, I was going to say, because Derek, you are a prolific a writer about anarcho-capitalism in particular. So I'm very eager to hear your definition and your distinction between the two.
So I mean, Hody kind of really already said a lot that I would absolutely agree with. My kudos to you, sir. But the thing is that first and foremost, I'm an anarchist, and what that means is that it's all about voluntary association, voluntary consent, and all of that. Like everything has to be voluntary. And while my brand is ANCAP, I think that probably a more accurate description of me is more of a voluntarist. I don't care what type of anarchist you are, as long as everybody is doing everything voluntarily, anarcho-communism, anarcho-socialism, anarcho-syndicalism, whatever, you do you. I have no objection to that. And even if I did, I'm in no position to tell you that you're doing anarchy wrong. If things are voluntary, then they're voluntary, and that's ultimately what anarchism is. I identify as an ANCAP if I were to kind of dial that label down a little bit more, because to me, capitalism is nothing more than the voluntary exchange of private property within a free market. And even I've spoken with ANCOMs who would agree with that being acceptable. They just wouldn't agree that that is capitalism. And going back to the semantics nature of this discussion, it really is semantical. Just because that's how I define capitalism, others might not. I'd rather not argue over how we should or should not define capitalism. Again, for me, it boils down to the voluntary association, the voluntary exchange, and the voluntary interactions that people have on a daily basis. If that means that I'm actually not an ANCAP, because in reality, there is some objective truth out there where capitalism is actually evil and I just have a misunderstanding of it, okay, then so be it. I'm not going to get upset over that, and I'm not going to cling to my brand, although it is kind of a catchy brand, so I might have a little trouble, but I'll get over it, and I'll adapt and overcome as the market sees fit. That's kind of the Campbell soup version, if you will, about how I view anarchism and capitalism and everything else. I think most people confuse or conflate capitalism and corporatism and, as Hody said, Keynesianism with one another, and to me they're three different things. And as long as it's voluntary, that's all I care about. So
right.
So I think it's important to kind of define like what we mean by capitalism, because I think people tend to use these terms very differently. So most modern anarcho-capitalists are Rothbardians, or at least they're descended from the Rothbardian strain of libertarianism. Now, Rothbard was heavily inspired by some of the earlier individualist market anarchists, such as Benjamin Tucker and Lysander Spooner. So he took a lot of his inspiration from them when it came to things like the nature of the state, the need for competitive markets. But then he took his economic philosophy from Ludwig von Mises. So, because some of the areas that the earlier market anarchists fell short was in economics, and that's not really their fault either. That's just because they subscribed to the labor theory of value, because that was the most common or most popular value theory at the time. So he kind of basically modernized the economic theory and then combined their free market philosophy with a more up-to-date economic philosophy. He started using the term, he actually did have mixed feelings about using the term capitalism, but he was using it because Mises was his mentor, and Mises himself in Human Action even acknowledged that capitalism was originally a pejorative term, but he adopted it because he found it useful and descriptive. But Rothbard also distinguished between state capitalism and free market capitalism, which is a distinction that I think a lot of people miss. Similar to the term socialism, which most people think of the statist variety, people tend to think of the statist variety of capitalism.
Right.
And then that's another thing. Like, the earlier market anarchists were considered a variety of socialists because at the time, anyone who was opposed to the existing system of capitalism was considered a type of socialist. At the time that Rothbard was developing his philosophy, this was during the Cold War era, and socialism generally meant the statist variety. So a lot of people were reluctant to use that term if they advocated a free society and for free markets. Even nowadays, most people who advocate free markets are reluctant to use the term socialist because of how most people perceive the term. We're also, or in a lot of cases, we're also hesitant to use the term capitalist because of how most people perceive the term. Like for instance, I think the biggest issue with using the term capitalism is because most people think, when they think capitalism, they think of the system that we currently live under with, where mega corporations rule the state and their lobbyists write policy. You tell people you're an anarcho-capitalist, they tend to automatically picture a system that looks very much like the one we live under, except with fewer regulations. They're like, oh, so we'll have Jeff Bezos running the country.
So it's even worse.
Worker protections. You can work 18-hour days, and we'll have children working in the mines. So then you scramble to tell them, no, what we really want are free markets where you can leave abusive employers and start your own company because there won't be licensing restrictions. But by then you've already lost them. So it's also just a matter of pragmatism, in my opinion.
Right. And I want to get to your all stories about, we're basically always an anarchist, but one thing that I want to touch on a little bit is, so very frequently you'll hear from anarcho-communists, anarcho-socialists that capitalism and free markets imply a hierarchical structure, right? And so anarchism is about dismantling any hierarchical structure that includes the government, but it's not only government, right? So it's also corporate hierarchy. Is that a valid criticism, or is there something being missed there? How do you all respond to that?
I would love to answer this question. This is
I'll let you.
I'll give you on deck rights here, Derek. But so I love this question, and it's appropriate to wonder this, right? Because if people are creating hierarchical structures, well, that's arc all over again. You're not an anarch at all if all of a sudden you believe in hierarchs. Now, here's the thing: arc means ruler, right? Anarch just means no rulers. So one of the issues that I have when we look at early socialist literature is that the reason they wanted to eliminate hierarchy is because they believed that, oh, well, if people are different, they're going to be able to take advantage of one another. When you read Proudhon, right, the philosophy of misery, by the way, Marx copied him when he wrote the philosophy of poverty. But yeah, the original theory is from Proudhon. Okay. All right, I like anarchy, like what you're kind of pitching here, but the problem, he says, is that if anybody has any intellectual differences at all, that the people who are smarter are going to just naturally rule over the people who aren't as intelligent. I have two beefs with that. One is that it's not actually factually true. We actually tend to see a lot of stupid people end up leading others, right? Like that's not necessarily the natural order, right? There are tons.
We're not talking about the White House right now.
Right. There are a lot of strong people that aren't automatically like they listen to their boss, who's this wormy little nerd, tell them what to do, and they don't just get to just beat him up on the spot, right? So we already recognize that simply being different doesn't mean that there's inherent hierarchical difference, right? I also reject in principle the term hierarchy, because being different doesn't mean you get to rule over me. I may be dumber than Rose and Derek, but they don't have any right to tell me how to live my life, what makes me happy, make decisions on my behalf. So it's really important that when we say, yeah, people are allowed to acquire property, I think what anarchists do that kind of the socialists, and I want to say, I love my current libsocs, right? So no diss to you guys here.
Mm-hmm.
But the original socialists, one of the things that the ANCAPs have an advantage over there is to allow people to be different, to embrace, yes, you're going to have different wants, needs, different loves, different interests, right? We don't have Rudolph Rocker over here telling us, oh, well, we would all be the same, except these Christians think they're better. So I guess we have to genocide all of them in order to make it happen, right? Rocker's got great ideas, but fell flat on that one. Proudhon, same thing. Got to murder all the Christians or else we're never going to have this society that we want. I want people to have ideas. I want you to believe in atheism, Christianity, Islam, and I celebrate our differences. And if you're wrong, that's going to come out in market ways. That's a great natural way to fix somebody's behavior, right? As opposed to a behavior that is just like, you're not allowed to do it. You're not permitted to believe it. You know, Proudhon went so far as to be like, we should have people not share information ever. And this is just one of those things that we can embrace being different without that being a hierarchy. There's going to be smarter people always. There's going to be stronger people always. Cool. That doesn't mean they get the right to rule over you. And thankfully, by you being able to create your own individual acquisition of property, they never get to. Because your bed is your bed, your house is your house, your food is your food, and nobody can take that away from you. And so that empowerment as an individual helps us avoid some of the collectivism that comes with the anarcho kind of, I don't want to say anarcho, but helps us avoid some of the mistakes that the socialists make. But Derek, I think the question's probably good for you as well.
So I particularly love this question, and honestly, I loved your answer. But I have a slightly different take. Whenever it comes to like business, which is typically why a lot of anarcho-communists say that anarcho-capitalism isn't real anarchy because you're going to work for somebody. The thing is, it's a voluntary association. And yes, your boss might be higher up on the employment chain, not corporate chain, because corporations won't exist in anarchy because it's a fundamental statist creation. But in business, okay, yes, you will have a boss, but your boss has a very limited scope of what he is allowed to, quote unquote, rule over you on. And it all pertains to how the business performs and your roles and responsibility for that. You don't have to work for him. He's not going to, come and murder you or kidnap you if you decide to quit your job. There is a give and take there. In that, okay, yes, I need to do what he says if I want to keep my job. But if I don't want to keep my job, if my boss is an asshole and I want to leave, I have the freedom to do that. And that's what is the main distinction between a voluntary hierarchy, which really isn't technically a hierarchy because it's voluntary, to Hodie's point. But for the sake of argument, I'll call it a hierarchy. It's voluntary. You can leave at any time. You can move up. You're not stuck at your rung for forever. You can even choose to work for yourself, create your own business, or just live off the land, till your own land, grow your own crops, raise your own animals. And guess what? You don't need to actually get a quote unquote job because that's how you sustain yourself. So because you have all of these options to you and it's up to you to make the decision for yourself and for your family what you want, it's voluntary and therefore is in alignment with anarchist principles, in my opinion. And even to like Ancom's points, chances are there will be someone to kind of help guide the community. They might not have a ruling fist if it's voluntary, right? But they might be able to offer advice that people heed to. And in that sense, it kind of develops a similar type of hierarchical structure that, again, is purely voluntary. They don't have to listen to this person or people or group or whatever. But they can, and they can choose to and go their own way. And, that might come with consequences. It might not. It all depends. But those consequences again would be known in advance, maybe some ostracism, something like that. Nothing that violates their actual rights, but because it's that voluntary association, that's what makes it in line with anarchist principles, even in like an anarcho-communist type of philosophy. And Michael has a great comment. Leaders does not equal rulers, and I 1,000% agree with that. So that's kind of my take on it.
I'm going to interject here because I think Grumpy Gnome's got a good point in that ANCAP Air does sound like an extremist. And by extremist, I mean radical. And I am a fan.
I am very much an extremist. Everything I write is harmful extremist content. Do not read it at all because the state will put you on a list, I'm sure.
Right. So I think I generally agree with what the others have commented. Like, most anarcho-communists will view the employer-employee relationship as inherently coercive. Now, I think that in a free society, you would not have large corporations, as those are, as has been pointed out, creations of the state. How coercive they truly are really depends on how readily you can leave. Okay, if there's, for example, only 2 employers in your chosen field in your given area, and you can only really realistically choose between them, you can't go into business yourself because it's a heavily regulated field, you're kind of stuck working for someone, in which case they have a considerable amount of power over you. That is kind of an unjust hierarchy. They can offer terrible working conditions, few benefits. If you can leave and start your own business, or there are other corporations, or rather, there are other companies, there are smaller firms that will crop up in their place, then it's far less coercive, because then employers will have to compete for you to work for them. So, yeah, it is a hierarchy. However, and then that's another thing. Like, some of the more left-wing anarchists will argue that, wage labor is inherently exploitative, and that in the absence of a state, no one would want to work for a boss. I don't necessarily think that's realistic. I think, yes, in the absence of a state, in a stateless society with radically freed markets, I think you'd see a lot more co-op type arrangements, and I think you'd see a lot more sole proprietors and entrepreneurs. However, I don't think it's realistic to think that everyone would want to go into business for themselves or work for a co-op. Like, I think a lot of people are perfectly happy to go to work for a boss, do exactly what's expected of them, get paid a set amount, and then go home and move on with their lives. Like, I don't think wage labor would disappear. However, I think you'd see a lot more people going into business for themselves. I think that would be an option. And I think you'd see just you'd have a lot more competition in the market. So you'd see workplaces would be a lot less coercive. And people would have options. So again, there would be hierarchies, but they would be a lot less coercive than they are.
You mentioned, Kyle, go for it.
I actually worked for one of the biggest providers of electric member cooperative software in the world. And they had to be a not-for-profit to do it and everything. Working directly with our customers, the co-ops, was so eye-opening at the time. It was actually a big radicalization for me, as at the time closer to just pure constitutionalist, because these people were providing power. They were actually more reliable than the big players like Southern Company. They were selling their power and their gas and even fiber and everything cheaper than the big guys. So you think economy of scale should be working, but they were running on a thinner profit margin because they were owned by their actual members. And watching that at work was like, this is what anarchy would look like. People would form this cooperative, this unit to all work together to solve a problem. And it's going to be better than the ones that are centralized. It's going to be better than the corporations that were getting protected by the government. In Georgia, we have 5 public service commission districts, and they set power prices. the government sets our power prices in Georgia. And the co-ops are legitimately 10 cents a kilowatt hour cheaper. So like I am certainly digging what y'all are putting down.
Yeah. And you, Rose, had in an anarchic society, you wouldn't have corporations. And technically that's true. Like you wouldn't have this designation corporation because it's incorporated, right? But you also seem to be arguing that you wouldn't have large behemoth organizations, business organizations. I think the tendency is to assume, well, the reason that, I mean, we already have these, and the reason that we don't have monopolies all over in every industry is because of regulations, right? That keep companies from becoming too massive, allegedly. So what is it about anarchy that wouldn't cause that problem?
Well, I want to answer, but does anyone else want to talk? Because I talked for quite a while.
It's free for all. I can jump in.
You're good, Rose. Go ahead. I'll take on deck.
Okay, so yeah, the idea is, the state is what protects us from giant corporations buying out all the other companies and having a monopoly. However, if you look at the most heavily regulated parts of the economy, and then you look at the most the areas of the economy that are controlled by the fewest number of players and that have the highest prices, like, okay, for example, healthcare and education, they have the most regulations and they have the highest prices. Okay, clearly the issue is not that the state isn't preventing monopolies from forming. And then we've also seen this, like, if people are free to start their own companies, then for example, suppose you have one company offering a particular product. People are buying this product, there's high demand for it, and then they try to raise their prices. A new corporate or a new company will likely show up and try to offer that product at a lower price because people are going to be reluctant to pay the higher price. There's going to still be demand, but there's going to still be demand, but people aren't going to want to pay the higher price. So now there is a market for that same product at lower prices. So what happens under the current status system is that the company that's providing the product is going to go to the state and they're going to try to get regulations passed limiting who can offer this particular product. Okay, we've seen this. We saw this, like people like to cite, for example, the railroads as an example of a natural monopoly. Those were heavily regulated by the state. If anyone else wants to go ahead before I get carried away.
Sure. Our oldest highway, in well-maintained condition, created by farmers in a single day. And that's because the farmers altogether were like, we want people to be able to get here and get to our stuff, right? Like that's important to us. So let's cooperate, right? We need to talk a lot about cooperation because I think that's something that's important within ANCAP philosophy that sometimes gets let down by capitalists themselves because they see everybody else as self-serving. Whereas in reality, it's other people serving that gets you rewarded in capitalism, right? Like that's the only way that we're going to profit together. Something that I do want to talk about here, since we're bringing up some of potential exceptions to this rule and poking holes in things a little bit. Listen, we're all honkies on this chat. Why is this? Why is this a bunch of white people right now? Well, it could be that the founder of
we have Donnie and Jeff Charles coming on soon.
I am excited to see them.
Okay. We have at least a modicum of diversity sometimes.
That's good. No. And a couple ladies, which is good. And I appreciate being the token bald guy. Like we have some differences, which is
this
good.
was discussed. Yeah.
You could also argue that Amanda's is not white.
Right. Oh, okay. Sorry. Griffiths. I should have recognized that as a Latinx name. My apologies.
Exactly. Yeah. No, you should have.
I mean, Leatherman supposedly has Jewish origins, so
okay.
I may or may not be all white. So I guess that's
so we're up to 2-ish.
Cool. And John's is toilets and British, so I'm white gutter trash, quite literally.
There we go.
But
There we go.
But
I'm
there's a
married to a
reason.
mixed race woman, so I'm not white by marriage. Sorry.
There we go.
Excellent.
It's he has a non-white friend, so he speaks for. Sorry,
I will
sorry.
allow Derek to say the words due to his experience. I cannot. I'm honky through and through. But listen, the reason I bring this up at all is because unfortunately the founder of the term anarcho-capitalism decided to kind of go post-liberty and endorse guys like David Duke, right? And there's something to be said here for the fact that like we're just getting started, right? Think about the cool anarchist history that has been left-leaning, right? But look at what they had to move on from, right? Like, as I mentioned, the guy who founded it, abjectly genocidal against both Jews and Christians, right? There's growth that has to happen from here, right? We don't want to say we were perfect in our origins, but where we can go needn't be this bleak place, Leftist anarchists have several successful stories. In fact, fun fact, no anarchist society, you can look this on Wikipedia, go entry by entry, I've done this before on a list, has ever fallen back into statism, back into fascism, back into anything else. All of them, 100% of them, have been destroyed by other states, right? That's the only hiccup in anarchy. So everybody, and listen, I understand all the worries people have. How are the roads going to get built? How are people going to get paid? How are these structures going to work? How are we going to stop these people from taking over? Valid questions, although history already gives us that answer. We work that out. The only thing that stops us is people murdering us, right? Like that's it. And the thing is I like that the leftist anarchists have got their shot. We're just burgeoning with right anarchists, right? These people just barely died who founded this idea, right? This idea that people can still acquire property and it not be a natural hierarchy. I don't get to rule over Rose's life just because my basement's bigger than hers, right? Because I assume we both live in basements, right? I mean, we are anarchists here. So
we're libertarians. It's just kind of assumed that we live in our parents' basements still.
Yeah.
No, I own my own basement. Thank you very much.
But yeah, like we just got places
My
to
wife
go.
owns our basement.
Oh well. We've all got places to go. We've got growth here. We're actually just getting started as a movement. And listen, I don't want even people taking what's coming out of this generation as gospel. I want them to build on it, right? Like odds are we're going to make some mistake that in 200 years from now, people are going to look back and being like, I can't believe they all did this. What idiots they are. And I want people to look back and me being like, yes, we were idiots. Go be better. Go do better, right? Like, and the cool thing about anarcho-capitalism is it's not, I don't insist on my idea, right? You insist on your ideas. And it's not even may the best man win, because what's right for me isn't right for everybody else. May what's right for you win. And if it's not right for you, I want to have an idea that says try something else, as opposed to, sorry, you drew the card that says you're growing crops for the rest of your life. I'm sorry that doesn't work for you so much. Thomas Sowell, great book, basic economics, right? Kind of explains this, why big businesses are big. Now, big business, being big in itself isn't bad, right? When we have like insurance, for example, market insurance, I want a lot of people putting money into that pot. I want people covered, right? Like there's Larry Sharp says, right? Like we're not against universal healthcare. I just don't want the government to have anything to do with it, right? There are these great ideas that come forward here. Now, big businesses create a lot of security. Maybe not everybody agrees that McDonald's is the best burger, but we agree that it's a good minimum standard if I have $1 and I really need to not die, right? That going to McDonald's is a great place to be for that. What keeps them ethical is the idea that anybody can compete with them if they want. Now, that's factually untrue. The people who created Microsoft said they couldn't do it today. Apple couldn't do it today. If you want to try to explore aerospace, I mean, down payment, couple $1 million, the number one briber of politicians in this country. Look this up on opensecrets.org. You can see all of their the politicians and the donations they receive for all these parties and everything like this. The Retailer Association of America, right? American Association of Realtors. Why? Because property is a monopoly, right? You pay all these people off so that unowned property, you can't homestead that, right? That is government's property unless they decide to let you have some, right? And these are examples of how things get better simply by recognizing the problem. I don't have to sell people on anarcho-capitalism. When you recognize that's the problem, the solution presents itself, right? Get these people out of there. That should be an illegal practice. And I'm glad to talk to a bunch of people, whether you're anarchist, ANCAP, minarchist, whatever you may be, that would all agree that these practices have to stop. It's a huge uniter with everybody.
We've only got one minarchist here. Yeah. And Kyle, I think he's smart. He'll figure it out eventually.
He'll get there. Give him another 6 months.
He'll learn.
Tops. I want to jump in.
Rose here.
What was that? Yeah, go ahead, Derek.
Now, I want to jump in here. I kind of want to echo a little bit of what Hody said. Like it really is fascinating whenever you get into the nuance behind whether you want to call it free market anarchism, anarcho-capitalism, whatever the proper term for a free and open market with voluntary association may be. Because you start looking into today's issues. You brought up McDonald's and mega corporations like Amazon. Those really can't exist, at least for a long period of time, without the state. Because as Rose brought up, barriers to entry no longer exist. Those are put in place by the state. So if somebody does have unethical business practices, really bad work environment, anything like that, the market's going to respond to that very negatively. And there's going to be competition freely entering into the marketplace to solve that problem. And with that level of competition, you're going to, it demands and kind of self-polices, to make sure that workers are treated fairly, that they're given all the safety equipment they need and hazards are mitigated and things like that. And then you take it a step further as you explore these nuances within, our current society. If you think that it's capitalist, you start going into it and comparing it to what ANCAPs would say, talk about, just bring up intellectual property. ANCAPs would be like, no, that's not okay. You can't have a monopoly on an idea. It stifles innovation. It curbs any sort of development. Rose had brought up the example of, okay, some people like this product, and then a company starts to want to charge a higher price. Well, today, if some competitor wants to come in, he can't even sell that product because it's protected by the state, and he can't even develop it. He's just going to have to develop his own version of it. Whereas in an anarchist society, he could take those plans, make whatever improvements he wants to them, and sell it at a lower cost and win and legitimately have a playing field. Doesn't matter his size. He could be a startup with 15 employees going up against a powerhouse like Amazon for whatever type of version that would exist within an ANCAP society or stateless society, what have you, and have a legitimately level playing field and could actually win. If anybody were to try that today under the statist umbrella that we currently live in, they would get crushed, whether by lawsuits or just would never even get their foot off the ground, never get any sort of investment whatsoever because of regulation or any other barriers to entry. None of that would exist. And whenever you think about what the consequences of removing those barriers and removing those restrictions and removing intellectual property laws and all of that would mean, it only means positive things. There's no way. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong. If somebody can bring up an example of something realistic as to how getting rid of these things could have a net negative impact, I'll happily, have that discussion. But, you're talking about, improving the chocolate chip cookie, basically, because I like to use the chocolate chip cookie as a great example of intellectual property and its folly, right? Intellectual property says you can't make a chocolate chip cookie. Only I can because I invented it. You can't have any spinoffs of it. You can't use the foundation at all. And so if you want to make a chocolate chip cookie with peanut butter in it, you can't because I said no. And you take that, you multiply it to the nth degree for any type of anything. And the market ends up having such a positive impact. Consumers are happier. They get to pay less because the price is actually set by real world equilibrium, not trying to offset regulations, tariffs, taxes, whatever. It's legitimately an equilibrium price, and nobody has total control over a concept or an idea, and they can really profit in a way that makes the consumer happy, their investors are happy, everybody's happy. It's like Oprah of happiness. You get happiness, everybody gets happiness. And I don't say this as if to say that anarchism is utopian, because no anarchist rightfully says that anarchy is utopian. It's not. There's going to be bad things that happen, of course, but not in a free market. There's going to be, overall, it's going to be a net positive, and not to sound collectivist, but for the global population, it's going to be a net positive for everybody.
Right. Like, yeah, if someone had owned the rights to the very idea of a chocolate chip cookie, we probably would never have peanut butter chocolate chip cookies. Those are amazing, but they wouldn't have ever been able to produce them.
And I think the
have our broccoli cookies.
Intellectual property is an interesting issue. So for those who don't know, I have a concept parody album about the Russian Revolution. And since it's a parody album, then obviously what I'm doing is I'm doing fair use, right? So I'm taking prior music that's already been written, and I am putting new lyrics to it or whatever. If I were to just redo the song in its entirety, usually you need permission for that. I am of the opinion that there are certain things where something should be protected, right? A creation should be protected, but not to prohibit people from innovating on that, right? So I you can get people going back and forth sometimes with intellectual property.
I think we should define what we mean by property first, because intellectual property is one of those, it's one of those things that, first we need to have a good concept of what we mean by property. Like, I think we're probably all in agreement here that, like, okay, property, there are probably two ways to justly acquire property, either by the homesteading principle, you mix your labor with something, and that's what makes it your legitimately acquired property, or via voluntary transaction. Property also, per the market anarchist or anarcho-capitalist philosophy, needs to be a scarce resource. So the problem with intellectual property is that ideas are not a finite resource. So go ahead with what you were saying.
No, if there was somebody else that was going to interject.
I really couldn't have said anything better than Rose. I mean, property is the tangible fruit of one's labor, whether that means, like she said, you've actually labored in land and grown things, or you've voluntarily exchanged one piece of property for another with somebody else. I mean, that you can't get any more clear than that. Rose did phenomenally with that, so I can't.
So an idea, is that the product of my labor, I guess, would be the question. And do I have an exclusive claim to an idea if I came up with it on my own?
No. And what's funny is I've gotten into this conversation with people who have read my book, and I don't go into intellectual property in my book, but
we've argued about it before.
I have argued about it. I have essays on it, but I don't have it actually in my book. And somebody was like, well, what if I plagiarize your entire book, including the cover? I just slap my name on it and sell it. I said, you're within your rights to do that. But here's the thing. People will know you stole it because my publishing date was before yours. And I will have a case to say that, yes, you plagiarized this. And while there's no like monopoly on it, you can sell it if you want. And if you happen to sell more copies after the fact that, I raise hell saying, hey, this is actually my ideas on paper, which you can steal because I can't have ownership over those ideas, but you're presenting them as your own, fine, but I wrote it first. And if you sell more, well, then you were better at marketing than I am. And that's my fault. I should have been better at marketing. But even still, like, you can't steal my idea, because ideas are things that, I mean, anybody can have ideas. Two people can have the same idea who have never come in contact with each other.
Mhm.
Who owns the right to that idea? You could have 10 people who have never come across each other who have the same idea and create the same thing. Who owns that idea? No one. You can't own an idea. Anarchy is an idea. I didn't come up with it. I just put my own thoughts on it. Doesn't mean that I now own this specific philosophy. My philosophy is always changing. There's things in my book that I like. I have a chapter where I kind of rail against anarcho-communism for a bit. I no longer subscribe to that because I've talked to ANCOMs and I now know, oh yeah, I can see how this would work in a purely voluntary sense. And so I no longer really subscribe to that, even though that's not my flavor of anarchy. I'm not going to tell you that you're doing anarchy wrong just because it's not my particular flavor. So things change. And even if I were to create an invention, a widget, and you take those plans and you create your own and you sell it better than I can, I can't fault you for it. I can't even prove that you stole it. You could have come up with it on your own and just happens to share a lot of things. So you can't, there's no scarcity. Like you mentioned, there's no scarcity with an idea. You can't really own that.
Right.
In any real meaningful form.
Right. So if I come up with the idea for a widget, like, okay, I own the widgets that I've produced with that idea. If someone else comes up with a similar idea for widgets and they produce it on their own, and I try to stop them from doing that, there is really no way that could not be considered an act of aggression, trying to stop them from producing widgets on their own. The most I can, like, the closest thing you can get in a free society to intellectual property would be if you sell someone a widget, you sell it on a contract saying that they agree not to reproduce or reverse engineer this specific widget. But you can't actually stop people who have not entered into any kind of contract with you from coming up with a similar idea on their own.
I know that Kyle wants to get in, and so I want to bring him in first. Is that right?
Uh-oh. I was going to point out, we've basically gone the direction that I wanted us to start moving on this one. I am an engineer, and so I have a little bit of a different thought on this. Currently, there is not a good market for people to think of a new product and release it already. And that's going to be the easy way for people to counter me here. So I'm going to mention that part. But I've worked on projects that have taken 5 to 10 years to do all the research on and get the money behind and everything else. And so if I release that and I'm a little guy, and then someone big comes in who has, a giant group of people, and they can just snatch it up and start producing the thing that I made, it is a problem in my mind. And I don't see how there's a solution here without something to say that you can't take that work for free. Like in the case of the book that Derek's talking about. In my mind, there's a very different thing in saying, I have the same ideas as Derek. I've written another book. My book is, uses very similar ideas, but I did all the work for it. And saying, I have literally taken exactly all the work you did, and I have just made 1,000 copies of it. There's no reason for me to build software at that point, unless it's purely floss, right? Free liberty, open source software. So from my perspective, there's a major problem there. If I'm a physical inventor, I have a product. I've put the machines in. I've got everything there. You can't just easily clone it. But with something that's an inherently digital product, like at this point, even an ebook, I think it was a lot easier when books were all physical, because you'd have to have someone get a printer ready and they'd have to do the design and everything else. Do you still feel that same way about digital work, that might take forever. Like, for instance, like look at Windows. Like, it's easy to shit on Windows for some of the problems that are there, but there's a lot of ways where Windows is way superior to Linux. Like it works 50 years old Windows code, you can still make work. It requires a recompile at this point because of processor things, but that's a different story. That backwards compatibility, like someone could build out, but like the plug and play is better. There's differences in what's there. I'm not sure we would be at this point in computing, for instance, if it wasn't for the part where there's a monetary incentive there, because Linux is still not there for your average home user. So you might say that maybe it would be if it wasn't for Microsoft having an effective government monopoly, but I'm not sure. How do you, how does that work in y'all's heads?
Sure. It's a great question. And I do want to create a lot of sympathy for this here. Like, for example, you can find Harry Potter not by J.K. Rowling in China. It is simply a reskin, change a couple names. They own so much of our debt that international copyright laws, if we threaten that over them, they're like, cool, want us to sell off your debt? And we go, all right, I guess you've got these Harry Potter books now that aren't by J.K. Rowling, right? And now what does that do? As you're mentioning here, Kyle, what this does is it makes people less, want to write less because somebody is just going to reskin my book. Let's be honest, this is a problem currently. If you think all the authors are writing their own books, I got news for you as a literally professional writer myself. Mm-hmm. That is not the world we live in. People aren't getting credit for the work that they're doing. And it's a problem. And it's something that we need to address. We could expand this further. You mentioned engineering, Kyle. Let's talk about medicine, right? People have an idea. They do the chemistry. They do the work on paper. They release that idea, that final product. And of course the product itself, I mean, we see what medicine is like on the open market. It's pennies. I mean, sometimes they're offering it for free with labels on the bottle, like in the case of what was that, the Bernie Sanders one that he pointed out. I'm going to get the name of that later. But there was, something that went from, and then as soon as government tried to regulate it because they wanted to reward the people who invented it, $40,000 a month for that bottle, right? All of a sudden that was free. Now it's something else. So now I know you're not suggesting, Kyle, because you're like, you're not saying let's give it all to the government now, but like, what do we do, right? Not. What is up with this conundrum here? Because we do want something between I take your money or I take your stuff, you get no credit at all, and government gets it and they get $1 billion. Exactly. I don't know that there's a great answer for this because what you're asking is a moral question. And anarcho-capitalism is not a moral framework, right? What we are is a please don't do this framework. What creates a healthy community? I've talked about how important that is already within anarcho-capitalism. If I see somebody being not cool, well, I might not have a monetary way to smoke them, but I can certainly be like, hey, let's not do business with this guy. He's a jerk, right? Like, and hey, this works out currently in our current environment. What we need to do, though, is be more vigilant about this, about saying like, hey, what they just did over there, that really wasn't a cool thing to do. I'm not threatening government with them, but that's just not cool, right? Like there is room for that. In fact, after we establish the minimums of what anarcho-capitalism is, we're only getting started on what the maximums are, right? If all of a sudden I have a choice between visiting Kyle, who doesn't steal anybody's ideas, and visiting Derek, who steals everybody's ideas. And yeah, it might cost me a little more to visit Kyle or something like that. Well, the thing is, I recognize because of the way cooperative societies work that Derek is going to destroy my cooperative society. I don't want to do business with him. I want to do business with Kyle because I want there to be more Kyles in the future, right? And so, now listen, this takes into account individual accountability. This is actually much more likely to happen in an anarcho-capitalist society because every decision is individual for you, right? Like without any outside coercion, the house you buy, everything you do, it's all up to you. Now, I'm not going to downplay the importance of this, and I know it may sound unsatisfying, but think about all the terrible things you could do that are legal, that aren't epidemics.
This is not intended to be a Mo Rhodes argument.
Sure. Sure.
It's
good. It's good. It's good.
Well, that's good because we would never associate with you again if you made the Mo Rhodes argument.
Mo Rhodes.
The thing is what I'm saying here is it might seem unsatisfactory, but think of all the terrible things you can do that you don't because it's not cool. You could do things that create money. Really good example. You can always date somebody right before they're dead and steal all their money, right? Some people do this. Right? Some people will have Elon Musk's test tube baby because he's offering like money for it or something like that, right? There are people who will still date gross Leonardo DiCaprio knowing where he's been and what he's got, right? I'm not saying that the problem will ever be zero, but the thing is this isn't an epidemic. We all could be dating people right before they die and taking all the money that goes to their families. Why is this not an epidemic? Because it's immoral. Right? Because we don't like it, because it's not cool, because we don't want to be seen like that. We don't even want to see ourselves like that. Right? And so I think it's important to say, while I am outsourcing that morality from a central force or the government, I'm saying, I'm sorry, you guys don't get to decide anymore. And I'm placing it to the individual. The thing is, I trust the individual much more, especially within the context of a community. I'm not saying every community or every individual is going to be good, but that community can recognize what's good for itself and will say that type of behavior is not what we're looking for here. People deserve to be rewarded for their ideas, 100%, right? Like, and I believe that so strongly that I will pay somebody for their ideas. Think of all the subscriptions you might have where you're just paying for your people's ideas right now. All the Medium articles that you subscribe to, whatever it may be, you're paying for people's ideas right now that you could get for free. Why don't you just get it for free? We can still use Napster, right? You can still download illegal movies, but it's cool to pay for people's work, right? We recognize these artists worked hard. I want them to get paid, you know? And so there's a moral framework
that I
for
use
it now.
humble over everything else if possible.
Right. That's a very good point, though, because, yeah, a lot of people, like, forget that, like, if it's okay, if someone has actual talent, people will want to support them. Like, there are musicians who I'm fans of who, like, they'll release their music for free. People still buy physical copies of their music, or they'll buy merchandise because these people have dedicated fans who want to support them. Okay, like you see this also with, for example, games. Most people have no problem pirating games from the major studios who do stupid things like include DRM with their games because they're doing it as an act of rebellion, and also because they just don't like giant game studios who will basically ruin games and try to monetize every single aspect of them. Most people will happily pay for games from small independent developers because they want to see those independent developers remain a thing and continue to be able to put out new, well-made games.
Absolutely. And I want to say something real quick about what Hody's point was. And it was brilliantly put yet again.
It was really
we need
well
to get
done.
a beer sometime. But I want to bring up specifically.
Sounds like you're coming to Grand Rapids next year.
I hope so. Yeah, we can all hang out.
That would be cool. That would be great. But I want to highlight the power of ostracism, and I think that this is very under focused on whenever it comes to anarchist discussion and discourse. Ostracism is such a focal point that we really need to bring up just how damaging it can be to somebody. You know, right now cancel culture gets a really bad rap because it's mainly focused on stupid bullshit, right? And let's be real,
at least the part that gets loud in the news, right? Because like
right,
there's good
exactly.
cancel culture out there, but the news loves the controversy.
But whenever you get down to it, that's exactly what anarchy advocates for, because it is something that does not violate another person's liberty, because you're bringing attention to something that somebody did that makes them not want to associate with them anymore. You know, I've been laughed at by saying like, okay, yeah, you ostracize a murderer. As heinous as a crime as that is, you ostracize them from society. You don't realize just how screwed up their life could be. They lose their job. They lose nobody ever wants to trade with them. They can't, their money is no good anywhere. Nobody wants to buy from them. They have to exile themselves into the middle of nowhere and probably start growing their own food, and likely will just get, mauled by a bear anyway. But we talk about what constitutes acceptable behavior, and it's not always a question of moral or immoral or ethical or unethical, but if the society has generated this appreciation, this cultural understanding that you don't steal people's ideas, well, then if somebody does steal somebody's idea, it doesn't matter how big or small, they could get ostracized the same way as a murderer. Or they could be ostracized for just a little bit until people forget and they're like, okay, it wasn't that big of a deal. Now we can start doing business. Did you learn your lesson? Cool. But the power that rests in public ostracism and voluntarily disassociating with somebody is so powerful. And I think that really needs to be focused on a lot of discussions and just how powerful of a tool that is in the anarchist tool belt. Because it can really destroy somebody's life without infringing on a single hair of their liberty.
There's so much that I want to get to. I'm hesitant to continue to press on the intellectual property discussion. I know that I think probably all of us have more to say on that, but it sounds like what you're all describing is...
We just hit our largest audience ever, so everybody apparently loves this.
Well, they haven't heard me talk yet.
Our other stuff.
I think next step is that we do an actual debate with the anarcho-communists.
Right. It sounds like what you're describing is something that, and I think this is true for anarchism in general, can work on a very small level within small communities, right? When we have an entire, something the size of the United States or even the world, it becomes harder to enforce norms around theft and around what we call intellectual property, and it's very easy to, if I have more money, I can just spend a ton of money promoting your book, Derek, that I'm just advertising as my own, right? And I want to talk about your book too, but I can do that. So is this one of those things where we're talking about an ideal anarchic scenario, but we don't have that in political society with regard to intellectual property?
I would just highlight something that constantly gets... It's a question that gets brought up by non-anarchists a lot, but I don't really see a lot of good answers for it. And that is, how do you keep a large population controlled and on their best behavior without a centralized state? And the answer is you don't.
Yeah.
But that's not the point of anarchy.
The answer is the Second Amendment.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, anarchy is individual, right? And so it is as decentralized as you can get. It's down to the individual. I don't care what somebody in New York City is doing because I live in Dallas, Texas, or I live in LA or wherever. And I don't need to care about what they're doing because I have my house, I have my property, and, I have my friends and my neighbors and my business associates and whoever. Those are the people that I care about. And there's nothing wrong with that type of focus. And I think it's actually healthy. It's much healthier than worrying about, oh, what are they doing in California? What are they doing in Canada? What are they doing here? What are they doing there? Honestly, it doesn't matter. If it's an atrocity, okay, yeah, that's kind of screwed up, and we should probably maybe talk about it and get some awareness going. But ultimately, ultimately, what I care about is my immediate community, my immediate property, my family, the people that I care and love, and all that. And ultimately, that makes it so decentralized that it doesn't matter. If everybody adopts that, and anarchy kind of encourages, and I don't want to use the word forces because it's a bad word, but it does kind of force people to take that individual approach. Even in an anarcho-communist society, there is a sense of individualism that people need to have, and they will end up developing, I feel. And I kind of went off on a tangent and lost my train of thought.
You're fine.
So Phil Ryan couldn't be with us tonight. He already was busy in for something else, but he's got a pretty good question over in the X chat. Many of the ANCAPs right now have publicly talked about how they are against ostracism and they're against all canceling. So do you, where do you, I mean, like, obviously you've stated that you think that cancel culture can be used well, etc. But I guess, do you have a message to them on this one where you're, like, if you wanted to focus on that actual
Sure.
bit?
Yeah, I'll say it just slightly differently. If there's a big party and it's fun to be at that party, I don't have to take anything away from you outside of your invitation for you to really feel that you've missed out on something, right? Like, I don't think of it so much as ostracizing, so much as just being like, because then, like, what, I'm not speaking to you, not talking to you, something like that. So much as just being like, oh, well, we're part of this really cool thing. You're not going to be part of this cool thing anymore, right? Or you're not going to be invited to this cool thing anymore. And that's a shame, right? That's like a disappointment. So I think one of the things that anarcho-capitalists need to focus on is creating a culture that's so much fun and cool that you being not a part of it makes you feel like you've missed out on something, right? Like that like, it's just a great place to be. And so this is why I think, for me, I've left politics, obviously the anarcho part of the name, but I focus so much on culture. Because politics is downstream from culture. I'm not going to fix anything politically until I fix the culture, right? First of all. But like, if that's the origin, then we need to create a good culture around anarcho-capitalism. Let's be frank here. We don't have it, right? We saw what happened to the anarchists. How we struggled to find 3 anarchists. We're like anarcho-capitalists that didn't sell out for Trump. And there was like 4 or 5 of it. Like, it sucked, right? Like, we got seriously misled. This is part of having a new movement, right? This is why I give some props to the left libertarians for sticking at it for so long. But what did the first left libertarians do? Stalin, woo, yeah, right? Like, this is gonna be great. Mao.
To be fair,
He would
In all
like
fairness,
not a left libertarian.
in all fairness, the anarchists were kicked out of the International Working Men's Association.
The anarchists were butchered during
the ones that existed during the revolution were slaughtered.
You made the mistake of mentioning Russia, so finally
this
Amanda
is
is triggered.
That's the ultimate cancel culture right there.
This is an excellent point. The bulk of the people who were anarchists didn't get slaughtered. They changed because they didn't want to die, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and this is what's important here. Now, we're not talking about physical death, but a social death is actually very serious. In fact, when you research sales tactics, number 1 way you can get change somebody's mind is to threaten their life. Number 2 is to threaten their social circles. Right now, I don't like either of these. Are coercive tactics. They're not my favorite, but they are effective for making somebody change their mind in the moment. Right. And so I'm not trying to threaten anybody's social circles. I'm simply saying you're not going to get to be a part of this really great social circle. And so right now, as ANCAPs, we have a lot of work to do to get us to focus on building up that social circle so that it's such a positive thing, as opposed to trying to find it in, unfortunately, Donald Trump, like convicted sexual assailants and lifelong liars and swindlers probably isn't the place we should have thought, but we're lonely. Right. And unfortunately, see, this is why community is so important, and ANCAPs need to refocus on this as well. This is why community is so important. Until we can be small, we can be 1% and have success. Anarchists have succeeded at making societies with 1%, right? Like, we can be very small, right? As a Christian, don't even get me started on how the primitive churches established themselves, right? Fractions of percents, right? In order to build their society. Because what did they do? They preached healthy
just
stuff.
attacking Amanda again.
Right? I'm sorry.
No, he's not attacking. Kyle's just ragging on me. Absolutely not.
Love, feeding people, educating people, giving them medicine, becoming a welcoming place, and something that I did want to, and I'll just open the door to this. I won't expound upon it, but offering actual practical real help and plans. I think we talk about mutual aid a lot, and wouldn't it be cool to get there? That's something we can start to do now, right? These are things that people want to see. They don't want to just hear about. And I think that we anarchists need to develop more of that. I think we are so desperate for these kinetic plans that we sold out for a plan that didn't have a prayer, right? In order to because it was just a plan, as opposed to everything else, which is hypothetical, right? The reason I'm so invested in my community currently and the culture in my immediate circle is because that's something I can actually do something about. And it feels good to do something as opposed to just talk about it. The books are written about it, anarcho-capitalism, right? I can't write a better book than Rothbard and Mises and Smith and Hayek have already written. I'm not going to do. Derek has written a better book, but I can't, right? And so the
your
books are
philosophy,
out
you
there.
could. About your philosophy.
I did not write a better book than Rothbard. I am
Okay.
that those were your words, not mine. But I appreciate it.
I enjoyed your book more than I enjoyed Rothbard.
And
I will say Rothbard's a little
depends on
dry.
if it's 70s Rothbard or 90s Rothbard. I think there's a very clear distinction there.
Yeah, starting.
We don't talk about
my first
Rothbard.
My first introduction to Rothbard, like that I read myself, was Lou Rockwell Rothbard. So.
Oh, geez. Wow.
We've got a question on the screen, I know, and I think it's an important one. I am writing down frantically topics that I want to get to, but there's a question on the screen, so we should address that.
Yes, it's from Tumblr. I have had success in the incremental approach on other platforms, moving people more toward libertarianism and ANCAP. What do y'all think of that approach?
Oh, yeah, because I think I kind of actually touched on that earlier when I said one of the main reasons I don't use the term capitalism, in addition to just finding it historically inaccurate, again, because if I'm trying to sell people on our ideas and I say that, oh, I support capitalism, but like even more unregulated than what we have, again, I'm going to probably lose them immediately. So then if I'm like, no, what I really want is a society where like we could like people could open their own low-cost healthcare clinics. Okay, they wouldn't have to rely on giant overpriced hospitals with 8-hour wait times in their waiting rooms. But again, or like, a society where, say, you could go into business with yourself. You don't have to get a overpriced license from the state. You don't have to go to a state accredited school for 4 years just to get that piece of paper. Like, it's about being able to sell people on our ideas in the fewest number of words possible, because most people have very limited attention spans. You're probably going to have to start out communicating in sound bites, even though I hate trying to do that because, yeah, every time I try, I end up writing a whole essay when I'm trying to just write a tweet length response to something. However, yeah, I think you need to plant, you need to find an efficient way to plant ideas in people's minds. So if someone is complaining about healthcare being too expensive, just say, yeah, wouldn't it be great if, for instance, you could buy healthcare or health insurance across state lines? Or wouldn't it be great if members of the community could get together and open a low-cost healthcare clinic and local doctors could volunteer their time? Wouldn't it be great if you could buy the drugs that you need to survive at a much lower cost if more people could be manufacturing them because there weren't patent monopolies? Like, you have to be able to plant these ideas in people's minds. So, yeah. Again, I think not using the term capitalism is part of, for me, it's just also part of my overall strategy. I think that the word is so thoroughly poisoned that it's just, it's a losing battle trying to reclaim it and have it represent free markets.
So you heard it here first. Rose is starting the Capitalist Party to make sure to fight directly against the Liberal Party.
Oh, God.
I will say, despite my brand, I absolutely agree with Rose. Capitalism, the term itself is poison, and I hate that. I do want to try and redefine it back to the way that I define it, as voluntary exchange. It's kind of hit and miss a little bit. Sometimes it sticks, sometimes it's not. But an incremental approach is how you reach people. I didn't become an ANCAP overnight. I started off as a hardcore constitutional conservative, then became a bit more libertarian, conservatarian, then more libertarian, and then minarchist. And then I read Rothbard for the first time, and that's when I became an anarchist. So, everybody's different, and that's the key thing that people need to focus on, is that everybody is different. There could be plenty of people out there that are open to it as long as you can explain it in a way that makes sense. They can go from pure status to pure anarchist overnight. There are others that kind of need a bit more nuanced approach, and it's up to us to kind of identify how to best talk to people on an individual scale, because we can't change the collective overnight. We can't change the global population overnight, as much as I would love to. But that's why I write what I do. That's why I write essays, and I'm working on my second book now. Hashtag shameless plug. But it's to get people to think and maybe explore the ideas, try it on, see how it fits, maybe get a few questions, get the wheels turning. But believe me, I would love to be able to like upload ANCAP philosophy into everybody's brain, like on the Matrix. That would be great, but we just don't have that, and we can't do that. And it's just, people are different. Every person is different, and they respond differently.
Derek,
Right.
I know.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I know that Derek has a hard stop coming up, and I did want to talk about his writing from the beginning. So for me, I love to see people in the liberty and in the anarchist movement and any movement doing a lot of writing, because it is so important. And I think it's wonderfully iterative. You'll write something, someone else will pick it up and do something else with it and respond. And I think it's a great way to grow the intellectual backbone of a movement. What made you decide to start? Because you have this on social media too. You don't just have your book. What made you decide to start writing and then write books as well about this?
Man, that actually started back in my kind of conservatarian days. I started reaching out and writing op-eds. I wrote op-eds for Independent Journal Review like several years ago. And it all started because I was tired of just bitching on social media. I wanted to get my ideas out there because I was full of ideas. And, I wrote a few op-eds for them. I think I wrote one for Red State back in the day. And then I started becoming a bit more libertarian. I think I wrote one or two for being libertarian, despite the fact that I kind of shit on them lately. It's a whole nother thing.
Changed a lot.
Yeah, we won't go into that. But really kind of writing was has just always been something that I enjoyed doing. And even in high school, I used to get paid to write people's papers for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were an entrepreneur in high school too.
I was. It was great. But really, there was a friend of mine. I went to high school with her, and this was, this is probably 2015, so 10 years ago, something like that. And I was just like, I'm just tired of bitching on social media. What should I do? And she was the one who said, why don't you try writing op-eds? And that's what got me started. As far as the book is concerned, it was 2017. I was still kind of a minarchist at this point, libertarian, maybe a little bit more statist than a minarchist. But I was working for a grassroots gun rights organization in the state of Texas. And in 2017, if you remember, the shooting happened at Santa Fe High School. And this organization that I worked for, we collaborated with a couple other grassroots organizations, created this event, and I gave a speech at this event. And after my speech, I was talking a lot about like natural law theory, some John Locke, and tying it to gun rights and things like that. And after my speech, somebody came up to me and said, look, that was great. I feel like you should write a book. And I was like, you know what? I should. And I started writing what became my book the very next day. I went through a lot of iterations of it because I was researching. And honestly, my original idea changed so much because I started writing it as a minarchist. And what's funny is about halfway through, is when I discovered Murray Rothbard. And the first thing that I read was For a New Liberty. And I was like, this is amazing. It really did change my life, and it changed my entire book. And, I ended up having to rewrite about half of what I had already written because and my plans for the ending, I was going to rewrite the Constitution in a way that was amazing. And then I was like, well, that's not going to fly. So that was kind of my whole process. And I really do enjoy writing. I like the long form. Right now I'm working on my first novel. I'm kind of trying to take an Ayn Rand approach of, mixing my philosophy with storytelling. and in a way to kind of highlight the good, the bad, and the ugly with everything. Because I want to resonate with people, and I want people to think that, okay, anarchy is actually a really sophisticated and really tangible philosophy and should be treated as seriously as any other philosophy within political science, and be given some legitimacy. And that's ultimately my goal. And I think the more scholarly works that are on it, and I know I don't hold a candle to Rothbard or Hans Hermann Hoppe, or I'm just a little guy on social media, but I really would love to connect with people in a way that and explain the philosophy in a very logical and academic type of way, to get people to realize that, oh, these people aren't just crazy stupid that just want to do X, Y, or Z. They actually have
for yourself. Some
reasons
of us are
behind
stupid.
it. I mean,
we're all
the point.
crazy at the very least, but
Yeah,
I'd like to hope
but
we're not entirely stupid.
right. But the thing is, I want people to realize that this is a legitimate philosophy, and this is a legitimate way that society can function, and maybe we should explore it just a little bit.
LP Alliances is honestly making that feel more and more true and and realistic. The way that we organize, the way that we get things done. So,
in terms of shameless plugs, yes.
Really,
Now,
please.
we're
Yes.
on the topic of shameless plugs. Yes, join LP Alliance if you want a libertarian party that represents actual libertarianism and is going to get more actual libertarians on board with the overall liberty movement.
Yeah. And so are we, I'm looking at the back room chat right now. Are we wrapping? What's happening?
No, y'all can keep going. I just gotta jet. My wife made birria, and I don't skip my wife's cooking. So
Well,
yeah, by all means, y'all keep going.
We would love to do a part 2.
Yeah, I think we've got to do a part 2. So we don't want to ask too many questions without you here. So,
but
okay,
we can wrap up and plan for a part 2, because this has been what we've been wanting to get people on for a very long time who can really speak to to market and anarcho-capitalism. And again, we're just getting started on the writing discussion, which is of course very important to me. Getting like theoretical writing done. So yeah, very, very stoked to have had you on. And yeah, thanks for joining, and we'll see you again, and hopefully not too long.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Love you all. Bye.
love Derek.
Now he's got me thinking about
That
birria.
was fantastic. Yeah, but you also, Hody, you also do writing, and I'm curious about your
Writing, says the author.
What? You do writing. He does writing.
You also do writing.
Do writing.
Me, Hody, me write good.
It's this thing that the young people are doing.
You make the
writing.
You make the words. And so what are your thoughts on, I'm self-conscious. What are your thoughts on the role of literature in politics, and particularly in movement politics, and the role that plays?
Ask another way. What are thought on politic?
Politic bad. Me make fire burn down Hoppe book. Oh yeah. No,
That's how everyone used to just summarize my philosophy. State bad.
So you've kind of heard me say earlier, and it's going to sound like I'm downplaying literature just because we've written so much already. But I do want to emphasize that as we grow, it's important that we write anew. Derek was really humble about saying, I'm no Rothbard or Hoppe, but frankly, I would much rather somebody find ANCAP error than post Liberty Hoppe or Rothbard. And I'm with him. I have had those special feelings when I read Hoppe and Rothbard before, right? I've even had special feelings reading Rockwell. I'm just also aware that Rockwell made up a bunch of stuff about Mighty Ducks 2 because he's a flaming racist, right? Like, there's also problems with some of these people, right? Like, and so I understand that there's more to do. And like, even Derek acknowledged, like, hey, I wrote in my book about anarcho-communism. I've had a realization since then. I don't stand by that. Great! It's a big fat buffet, right? Like, dig into what you want and leave what you don't want want behind, and we'll keep going with what people want. Like, and so I do think there's some great literature and writing to be done. I don't want to mislead people about what I do. I am a video game journalist. I am not working on the next big libertarian book. I'm not working to replace Rothbard or anything like this. I really like short stories. I write short essays about liberty and stuff like that, but it's nothing that you're not, like, it's all on my social media. There's nothing big and upcoming about this. I have some good sentence structure stuff that people like, and that's why me write for big video game corporations. But yeah, like
writing, Hody write good.
Yeah, right.
This is perfect.
Hody also talk good.
Right, but
let me the best speeches, I think.
Well, thank you. Oh yeah, I mean, I did the Vermin Supreme speech and everything, and I do have some good speeches out there. If you're a paying libertarian and you need some speech writing, I'm a guy, right? But I mean, I'm happy with work. In fact, if you're not paying and I like you, I will write you a speech. I enjoy it. I do enjoy it. But there's something else I wanted to say here too. And listen, we've got a lot of messengers already. Let's not downplay any of that. But is messaging just using the English language? Is that just communication? I think this is good that we're kind of approaching our outro here, because what I do is I'm more in the religious side of things than the political side, right? I've done culture. I'm with a shelter. I'm with my religious groups, right? Like this is what I do now. Jesus once spoke this is in the Gospel of Matthew. You can read it word for word. And he spoke no scripture to the people. Fed them. That's it. And afterwards, the apostles are like, we didn't teach him anything. And Jesus was like, what do you think the gospel is? What do you think the good news is? Right? That later on in John, they're like, weren't you supposed to tell people you are the Messiah? And he's like, do you think they're going to get it by me saying it or me doing it? Right? Like, I don't need to say it. They can see my works. By their works, they shall know who we are. This is an actual statistic that was done. It's polling data, but it's still pretty accurate, at least as far as the respondents go. You are 6 times more likely to convert to libertarianism by getting out of debt than by reading a book written by a libertarian. Mm-hmm. Think about that for a moment. If I tell somebody nothing about liberty,
is to pay people out of debt, and they will
correct.
Come with me.
Buy them off.
Kyle, I'm in terrible debt, and I'm a Trotskyist, so you need to help immediately.
So this is the problem, right? Yeah, we need to. So this
all right,
is like
get on it.
So this is the importance here. If we are helping people with their daily needs, with what they want, they're going to find their way to liberty. I might as well have given them a Rothbard book and shoved it down their throat 6 times. Right? That this is the level of importance where we're at. So sometimes we don't think, oh, you're just volunteering at the shelter. That's not going to create a freer society. Oh, you're just helping out at the soup kitchen. Oh, you're just, you're just donating jackets. No, guys, that's even better currently at creating liberty than telling people about it. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't feel that way. I understand why it doesn't feel that way. As somebody who gets the jimmies down my legs and up my spine whenever somebody's preaching Rothbard or something, I get it, right? That it doesn't have that same magic. It doesn't feel magical, but that's because we're so atomized. We're so separated from each other. We shouldn't be that way. If when I heal this community, I'm healing their heart. Do you think healed people vote for Donald Trump and Kamala Harris? Do you think that a healed, sane, mentally competent, well taken care of, loved person is like Donald Trump, Kamala Harris? Heck yeah. No way. No way. So if all you are, you just say, I'm an insufficient messenger for liberty. And you just show up and you say, I really love you, man. You're my friend. I don't want you to be lonely. You've done more for liberty than anything I've ever posted online. That's just the way the data works out. And we're going to get there. It's just a matter of being willing to love again, being willing to understand that this is not a philosophy that's based purely on economics. Those economics are based on love. If you've read Basic Economics, he quotes Marx, he quotes Keynes all the time. One of the things you'll find surprising as you get next in economics is there's actually a profound lack of variation in opinion as far as what something will do. Marx was well aware that if we centralized like this, that people would starve to death. He was willing to say it, but some people gotta starve to death, right? Like that's just him. So what it is my difference with Marx, with big government authoritarians, it's not economic. It's conscience, right? It's moral, it's love. And so I need to love harder. One of the reasons that I think so many of the ANCAPs lost their way is because we didn't have a philosophy based on love. We had it based on economics. Well, economics never changes, right? I'll trust anybody with economics. It seems like most people get it unless you work for big government and then all of a sudden you say, this bill's going to be balanced for sure, except the guy who wrote it says it's going to add 20 trillion to the debt, but whatever. But most people understand that the guys who say it's going to add to the debt are correct, right? Like if they're being honest. What's different is love. And so I think that really that's where we need to get to, is really a connection and a love for one another, and understanding that if something harms Amanda, Rose, or Kyle, I am harmed as well. And I don't want to see that, right? Like I don't want to see damage done to these people. Hurt people is the quote. Again, how do we get Donald Trump and Kamala Harris? People feel hurt. They feel damaged, and they want to repay that damage with other damage. How many times did you hear from Democrats and Republicans these past 8 years? Yeah, I know that this is worse for our country, but look at all these guys crying. Look at them. They're hurt. They're sad. I made them so upset. I must have done something great because I made them upset. Well, that
Cut off my diabetes medication to own the limbs.
Right. We want people that are less upset and more loved, right? Like that's the better way to go about this. And I think that this is just the culture that we need to do better about creating ourselves. We're pulling a plank out of our eye, to use, again, some religious symbolism here. We need to focus on the plank well before we're focusing splinters on anybody else's. The epistles from Paul, I'll end on this one. The epistles from Paul were written to Christians. They weren't written to Rome. Yeah, Caesar's a worse dude by a lot, but I can't fix Caesar, right? I'm not going to fix Donald Trump at this stage of his life, right? Like I'm not going to change his mind on anything. I don't need status to behave any way other than what they're behaving. We will win if I get ANCAPs to behave the way that we need them to behave. We'll win. We just have to do that.
I think this actually leads perfectly into what we're going to have to do for part 2. I think one of the things that we should discuss is how we can use market anarchist or ANCAP philosophy to form communities and get away from the current culture we're seeing, where people feel like they have to support Harris or Trump in order to have a better chance of getting what they want. Okay, so I mean that'll kind of lead us into our discussion on how to form our own counter economies and how to actually implement our preferred philosophies in real life, I think.
Absolutely. And yeah, this was such a wonderful discussion, and I am very much looking forward to part 2. A great in the comments too. So thanks guys for showing up. Hopefully you show up and bring.
Yes, some ANCAPs be like, I can fix. Yeah. Another thing. Yeah, that's a serious problem with a lot of so-called ANCAPs who don't actually consistently apply their philosophy. Yeah, thinking that they could reason with Donald Trump, or at least that they'd have a better chance of getting what they wanted under him. But yeah, we didn't really get into this, but yeah, there are several reasons why I don't use the term ANCAP, and one of them is right conflationism, which we can talk about next time as well.
Absolutely.
Because that's kind of what leads us into the idea that we can use, for example, a Republican politician to get something that will more closely approximate anarcho-capitalism.
And that's been prevalent for a very long time. Interestingly, when the LP first started, it was the converse, right? So let's get people from the left and the anti-war people, and it just flips because we don't have ideological major parties. Kyle, final thoughts before we say goodbye.
So far, my thoughts have mostly been coughing lately. There's a lot of comments that aren't necessarily coming through for us, and so they haven't been thrown up on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Like Phil pointed out here, we already have a public image of not caring. I want liberty to better help those suffering. Derek has been in the comments pointing out, as Hody was given his final speech here, that he loves love. And that's, to me, that is the number one thing that it got me into libertarianism. It when I listened to Harry Brown 25 years ago, the thing was all about the fact that it's not about red versus blue. It's not about any individual concept as far as what we need to do as some collectivist group, but what we need to do as individuals, and how the way to live our life is all about that love toward other people, and how we don't need the government to hand out money because they don't know how to do it. We will do it because of the love, because of the caring about other people, because of how important humanity is to humanity. I think that's a beautiful thing. And so it was a really great thing to hear tonight from anarchists who, are trying to live this every day. I'm really excited that this is how part one's ending, and we will certainly be excited to create a part two.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, all.
So catch you guys soon.